Hello there. I would just like to quickly talk about a couple of things that has come to my attention or that has popped up in my private practice lately. And one of the major themes that I think has a lot to do with what we're experiencing at the moment here in Adelaide, now that we've got a 6-day lockdown, is the internal dialogue. The question here is, why is it that some people respond in a more positive way to a challenge or a trauma or a negative experience than other people who react the opposite way? What is it about us that makes us that different? And I think one of the main aspects is the internal dialogue. What are we saying to ourselves and about the world? What is the meaning that we give to what happens to us? Because ultimately, it is a choice. And I always say that we've got control over 4 things in our lives, and that's it. We have control over what we think, what we say, what we feel, and what we do, and that's it. And that is my responsibility. There's nothing beyond that that I can really control. And I think all of those make up the one thing called attitude. And we know that the saying goes that the only thing you can change is your attitude. But I think the composition is or the anatomy of attitude is basically what I think, what I feel, what I say, and what I do. So it's really important to check our internal dialogue, because that is ultimately going to determine our behavior. How do we respond to different situations? Are we able to detach and see it from a distance and be more objective, or are we in the eye of the storm? And I guess it's easy to say to someone, positive thinking. It's not that easy. There's a whole process to it. However, if we can start to identify and be aware of negative thoughts, that internal dialogue, that meaning that we give to something that is happening to us, and we can identify that by having that awareness, then only are we in a position to challenge that and to change that and to replace that with something more constructive. It's not easy, and because of the habitual thinking that we've been experiencing for so long in our lives, it's really hard to change those thinking patterns, but we know it's possible. Neuroplasticity of the brain gives us that understanding that we can rewire the brain. And it takes a lot of practice, it takes a lot of insight and a lot of understanding of what the processes are that underlies this, but it is possible. And I think if we can all just start being aware of what these thoughts are, then we can start changing them and replacing them with something more positive. It is said that we have between 60 and 70,000 thoughts a day, and most of them, more than 70%, are negative in any way. So it's a natural thing, seems to be, for the brain to hold on to negativity as a kind of a defense mechanism. It's kind of a safety measure, because remember, that's the number one job of our brains, is to protect us from harm. So if we hold on to negative stuff and we remember negative things, the chances are that we might not experience that in future because it was unpleasant. Might be part of the rationale behind why, from a survival perspective, the brain tends to do that. So I guess the message here is check your internal dialogue. Check what you say to yourself about yourself, and what do you say to yourself about the world, and what is the meaning that you give to what other people say or do. And as I said, just to reiterate, ultimately we have control over 4 things in our lives, and that's it. We control what we think, we control what we say, what we feel, and what we do, and that's it. I cannot control what anybody else says, feels, thinks, or does. That's their responsibility. My responsibility is to take responsibility of those 4 things. That encompasses the concept of attitude. So let's all try that. Let's try to be aware of that internal dialogue, and let's make sure that the things we are trying to control are one of those 4 things, or all of those 4, when we are faced with a challenging situation.